Good afternoon. Welcome to a DELMIA Quintiq webinar, Optimizing the Entire Food and Beverage Supply Chain, How Companies like Smithfield Transform Their Business. My name is Caitlin Noah, and I will be your moderator today. Our presenters today are Charlie Figlow of DELMIA Quintiq and Brian Gordon of Smithfield Foods. Before we begin, please note the GoToWebinar control panel on your screen where you can choose how you'd like to connect to the audio for today's webinar. If you have questions during the presentation, please type them into the Q&A box located on your GoToWebinar window, and we will answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. This afternoon, we will highlight the world's largest pork processor, Smithfield Foods, and hear about the complexities of their business and how they've applied DELMIA Quintiq solutions. Thank you for joining us today, and at this time, I'll hand the presentation over to Charlie.
Thanks, Caitlin. Hi, everyone. This is Charlie. I'm going to introduce DELMIA Quintiq and today's topic quickly before we have Brian take center stage. So DELMIA Quintiq was founded in 1997 with a vision to solve any planning puzzle with a single application, be it in manufacturing, workforce, or the logistics spaces, and across any industry, be it food and beverage, metals, or aerospace and defense, to name a few. We hold almost 200 world records in competition solving flexible job shop, vehicle routing, pickup and delivery puzzles in the least amount of time with the most optimal result. This same optimization is utilized by our customers to yield millions in benefits. We offer global 24/7 support via telephone, email, and our web knowledge base. And those involved in support have direct access to client-specific information and aligns with the regional support team. So today we're going to be talking specifically about food and beverage supply chain. After working with a number of customers, some of the challenges we typically see in this industry are the following. Having real-time visibility in the supply chain. For example, having accurate inventory in the production environment, so no interruption to planned production schedule occurs. Or in ATP, where the sales team is selling valid inventory that exists and isn't already reserved for other customer orders. Or in the deployment space, where you're relying on accurate inventory to schedule logistics. And this gets increasingly difficult when looking across the network, beyond a single production site, looking across multiple plants and distribution centers. It's necessary to have this visibility for purposes of showing, for example, capacity in aggregate across sites, so you can make informed production and fulfillment decisions. Another challenge is the optimal use of material. An industry with complex BOMs, for example, in protein, an effort to yield as much profit from a raw material as possible and reduce as much waste as possible, where primal cuts affect all the downstream production decisions, leaving you with limited choices. Having the capability to model the most profitable production choices is necessary. And lastly, shelf life considerations, where you're managing the shelf life of your products. Considerations such as, should I make fresh, should I make frozen, and how much of each? Or, for example, distribution standards set by grocers around minimum shelf life requirements. That said, here are some of the capabilities that DELMIA Quintiq offers to overcome these challenges. Integrated planning, end-to-end, from strategic S&OP to master production schedule to detailed scheduling and transportation, across all the planning horizons and functions, which helps foster a collaborative environment where everyone is looking at the same data. Supply chain visibility, looking across all the assets, be they plants or distribution centers or third parties in your supply chain network, understanding where are the bottlenecks and what are the alternatives to ease those bottlenecks. And lastly, decision support, where you're managing by exception instead of reviewing your whole portfolio, or what-if analysis, offering you the ability to change aspects of your supply chain in a sandbox environment and compare it to your current supply chain to make informed decisions.
Let's now see the visibility and decision support aspects of Quintiq come into play in this protein planning demonstration. The typical protein planning process involves several steps: optimization of planned cuts based on supply and demand, reviewing orders coming up short, and confirming supply orders for production execution. In this demonstration, we'll focus on addressing short orders. Here, we can see our kills are short of our forecast. Quintiq optimizers produce the best plan considering available supply and is providing us visibility into exceptions that we need to manage. In this view, we're seeing an order that has insufficient supply. 28 of the 30 requested units are available. I can filter on compatible supply options and also check for pull-ins and substitutions in pursuit of fulfillment options. Here, Quintiq feedback is informing me the supply doesn't meet the expiration requirements of the order, but in Quintiq the planner is always in control, and maybe the customer is willing to take the supply to fulfill their order in full. Let's assume our customer has decided to take the earlier expiration product, and in turn will reallocate the supply to the pull-in. As I make the selection, you'll notice Quintiq is providing me feedback that this has an earlier pick start date, but as the planner is always in control, I can override the warning and allocate the supply. And as I make the change, you'll notice my KPIs are updating in real time to reflect plan performance. Now we also have some new orders that need to be planned. And through optimization, Quintiq will perform checks on material and resource capacity availability so that we can accept these orders with confidence and accuracy. So in this short demonstration, we've seen Quintiq's protein planning solution that can produce optimal and feasible plans very quickly.
All right, and now what you've all been waiting for, I'll turn it over to Brian Gordon, Senior Director of Fresh Meat Supply Chain at Smithfield Foods, where Brian will discuss the planning complexities that he faced and how DELMIA Quintiq helped overcome and face these challenges.
Hello, everyone. Good to be with everyone and talk a little bit about Smithfield's life cycle we've had with the DELMIA Quintiq solution. I'll explain a little bit about our company, Smithfield. We're currently the world's largest pork processor and the world's largest hog producer. While doing so, still operating in 5 countries as a $15 billion company. Being large comes with complexity, but for these purposes of this conversation, I'm going to talk a little bit more in a focused channel of our domestic operations. Currently in our domestic operations, there's 45 plants, which 9 are fresh. We have 2,100 contract farms, 550 company-owned farms, of which 64% are currently in our company-owned. 6 distribution centers, and those distribution centers currently are distributing, in conjunction with our plants, over 6.8 billion pounds of fresh pork today in the United States. If we look through some of our operations today, you can begin to get some size and understanding of why Smithfield has complexity in some of its areas of supply chain with so many plants and so many areas, and then, of course, creating so many complexities between which is really 2 divisions between our fresh and our packaged division. I'll talk a little bit about the digital supply era. So Smithfield, like many other companies, is faced with a unique challenge in today's times. The term supply chain didn't even exist 20 years ago. As we've begun to really understand what supply chain really means to an organization, and really means to the B2B relationship, and even B2C in some cases, we begin to understand the need and the necessity for speed and efficiency within that supply chain, and there was no greater way to do that than to digitize that total network of supply. So I'll talk a little bit about what we've seen as we begin to discover and begin our journey as a company into digitizing our supply chain. We knew that our speed of business was going to require something that could move very nimble and very quickly through just the standard life cycle of business. In our world, in the fresh meat division, we operate with a maximum shelf life of most items of about 7 days. So from the time we harvest an animal and put a product in a package, we've got typically 7 days at the most before we deliver that to a customer or to a freezer if it's for further frozen temperatures and sales later further out. So if we look and think about what that will mean, our cycle, if you include transportation, warehousing, and movement times, are very quick. So from the time we get an order to the time we're making it, everything is done on a make-to-order basis, and yet it's still a push supply chain. So all this becomes the necessity of speed, and then with all that speed becomes the necessity of so many cross-functional areas working at that same area of speed need the centralized data. The centralized data really for us is the central hub of information so that the reporting networks as well as the transactional data networks are all working off the same data sets. And you don't have different people working in WMS systems that don't match up with your ERP system as well as what may be your S&OP software. So finally, our cost efficiencies through all of this, we're like any other company. We're looking to save money, but the reality, you almost can't afford to not create a good experience anymore with your B2B. You know, you're not. There's so much competition in the world today. It's certainly in a commodity protein disassembly area of business that you really are required to make things pleasant, make things easier, and how you can partner with your other business customers. And so as we do that, we have to find ways to drive efficiencies in our plants, in our transportation, in our scheduling, and in our sales forecasting. So for us, these are the three primary areas in which when we looked at saying, okay, if we digitize our supply chain, this is what will take Smithfield to the next level into the next 10 and 20 years ahead. So talking a little bit more about the complexity of Smithfield, we talked a little bit about how many plants and the size and scope, and certainly that allows people to get some understanding. But let's talk a little deeper about what really drives complexity for a protein disassembly company. I mentioned that it is a push supply chain, and certainly there are market disruptions in almost any commodity world. But I'll really, if you think about market disruptions recently are on everyone's top of mind. They feel like that they're certainly of greater consequence at this moment because of international trade situations. And the reality is that some of the tariffs and some of the exchanges between international countries have in terms of analysts and certainly within so much of the media, has disrupted global economics. Well, that's not really true. It is certainly creating a disruption. However, those disruptions have always existed. It's just getting a lot more media play now. Those disruptions may even come with higher velocity in some areas, but the reality is that those disruptions have always been there. And so as we look at the global industry of how the commodity protein disassembly world works, when you push down in one area, somewhere else in the world lifts up. And so we've certainly seen that in our area, and certainly not without pains, but it's of how we handle those disruptions within our systems and how we forecast that really make a true difference in how we handle and deal effectively with all the tariffs and disruptions. So certainly currency exchange and labor are two other areas in which are pretty large for us. Labor is certainly one that's top of mind. If you ask any protein disassembly company in the last 5 years, it's probably one of the most common topics that's discussed within any industry at this point because it's growing harder and harder to fulfill these types of positions. And so automation is being requested. With automation comes opportunity, and people tend to believe, well, that's automation is taking away jobs. That's not fair. It's really not anything any close to that. It's actually repurposing skill sets and giving the opportunity for people to gain further skills to be able to now take the automated equipment that's being put in a lot of these equipments, in a lot of these plants, that allow the data coming from that equipment to now be mined and utilized for even more efficiencies and better understandings for improvements for all areas. And so we look at this as more of a labor repurposing but automation is definitely an opportunity that we'll see more and more companies having to take advantage of. So let's talk a little bit about why Smithfield chose the DELMIA Quintiq solution. For us, when we thought about, we recognized that we needed some S&OP software solution, and as we thought about what we needed from a sales forecasting standpoint, we really said, okay, well, there's a lot of options. We've certainly evaluated multiple companies. For Smithfield, we were really coming out of a archaic world of spreadsheets and and almost scratch pads, if you will, in some areas. But the reality is, while that sounds so bad, there's actually a lot of companies sitting in boats today that are very similar, because while they have systems, many times people abandon the systems or avoid them and do their own work in an Excel spreadsheet, and then, of course, they make it feel good by dumping it into their quote-unquote system. We decided when we were doing this that we were not going to be a part of that. If we were going to do this, we were going to do it right. So as we looked at a lot of what we saw in other companies, which we evaluated for multiple months in many cases, we really couldn't find one that allowed the Smithfield kind of needs to be incorporated with the solution that we were receiving from that particular vendor. As we started evaluating the DELMIA Quintiq solution, one of the things that we quickly noticed is that there was a core foundation of the software solution that Smithfield could be, everything we needed from a business side could be built on top of that core foundation. That, for us, was one of the largest reasons we really felt Quintiq brought a viable solution that we knew would be there for the next 5 to 10 years. They were very upfront with us and told us to kind of apply more of a crawl, walk, run principle and not go enterprise-wide, but to start off with demand and supply planning modules, of which, quite frankly, we've been very happy with thus far. We're still fine-tuning, but as we look through some of our experiences and through the evaluation phase, we certainly were happy with how the DELMIA Quintiq approach really was built around our company, not just laid on top of something or bolted on or kind of interfaced in, if you will. It seemed to be more of an integrated solution. So let's talk a little bit about what makes kind of the Quintiq solution really work is the optimizer. The optimizer was one of the best units that really intrigued us. From the very beginning in which we heard about it, we started learning more. But the optimizer was about basically putting multiple algorithms into the optimizer to provide the best results. So you have as you provide the data in, the optimizer is looking for the best results. And one of the things we quickly started thinking about was said, well, wait a minute. What if what we desire is different today is the best result versus what maybe next month is considered the best result? Because what we started to realize is how you define best result really changes, even sometimes seasonally for the same company. Sometimes it's definitely going to change between companies. Matter of fact, almost never is what total is important to one company is to me the total package of what's important to the next. So we started to realize that one of the unique elements of the optimizer was how the optimizer could be measured against KPIs that were defined by the company itself, not by DELMIA Quintiq. Of course, they were the ones that implemented it and put them in an application against the optimizer, but they were the ones that kind of worked in collaboration with the company for us to be able to collectively say, this is what is important to us. This is what's most important. We actually found ourselves enjoying the process of what we thought was important to us may not always end up where we finished. We found that in some cases we went back and adjusted some of our KPIs to look at the kind of the percentages of weighting to determine what was really most important for our organization. Lastly, the optimizer was the ability to run the what-if scenarios. We're working in a commodity world and understanding what, where, and when, and even in some cases how is really important to us, and from a capacity restraint standpoint, and having the ability to look out front and determine what our capabilities are to accomplish a potential sale was something we really didn't have in the past, other than just scratch pad and paper and Excel spreadsheets. So this was really the unique opportunity for us to really to quickly be able to play what if scenarios through our sales and be able to basically turn forecast back into potential win situations for our company. I mentioned the two modules in which we went live with, the sales reservation and the supply planning module. These are two in which we kind of brought into deployment at separate times. We layered them as far as some of our deployment, and we'll talk a little bit more about why we did that, but later on. But I'll tell you a little bit about why we went with these two modules, and that was, we knew that through these modules we'd have increased internal data accuracy. Like any company, when you bring in software programming, you're dealing with your data warehousing, your master data sets, and ensuring that what you get in is what you're going to get out. We knew we had data that needed to be improved because we had just brought in multiple ERP systems that we were bringing everything into one, where we were consolidating basically 3 ERPs. We have improved sales forecasting. Right now we're running, as about 6 months into it, we're running about 12% above where we were the year prior to bringing on our demand planning or sales reservation model. We also changed how we looked at it. One of the things we did before with our old world was we would look at things in totality, where we might say, look, this customer was off 10% last week. Well, we'd say, okay, that's great. But they may have been off 10% one product. They may have been above 50% on another product. They may have been down 50% on another product. And all in, we're like, okay, 10%, that's good. No, it actually was a major disruption to our company. And so we changed it within the DELMIA Quintiq solution, how we could more look at that at a more granular level and really start to have some understanding about each particular line item and how that was affecting our performance, understanding the disruption it was creating our business, and how we could work with the customer and sales representative to ensure that that was fixed going forward. Our improved visibility, product availability was really one of the key elements for us. We always had the ability to understand how much and kind of when from the standpoint of a week, but until we got inside of about a 72 to 96 hour window, we really didn't have a clear vision of what that looked like. As we brought on the supply planning module, we began to better understand not just kind of what we had in totality for a week out front, but we began to understand that what we had available to us, where, when, how much, and in what capacity could we actually produce that particular product, whether it needed to be in a certain packaging style, whether a certain trim style. But when you're dealing with CPG companies, it's important as you make promises to customers, you want to be able to make sure that your fulfillment is as high as possible. Our ideal planning window is about 4 to 6 weeks out front. The better we are able to maintain those sales out in that 5-6 week window, we know from just history that we bring the best financial bottom line performance. For us, it's about understanding how to understand that availability, where it's going to be available, and how we can deliver it to make sure that our B2B relationships are continue to improve. Lastly was our capable to promise and available to promise. We refer to them in an acronym as CTP and ATP. These are areas that really are the finite capability to try and not oversell demand. The reality is that we have a push supply chain. It's coming at us one way or the other. And the reality is with a push supply chain, it's really you have to pull some levers to balance demand and supply. For us, it's really about understanding how to create that balance And so we use price, of course, like any other company to do so, but every once in a while you're not going to do it just with price. Demand will strip supply in some cases, and in those cases, we have the ability to tell our customers at the very first entry point, can we give you what you've requested, and can we deliver it at the time in which you have requested? And that's something that was extremely valuable to making our customer experience better with our company. So I'll talk a little bit about the opportunities. Anytime you deal with software implementation, it's always it comes with some challenges. And certainly the DELMIA Quintiq solution has certainly had some challenges within our company that we kind of somewhat expected. One of which we probably didn't suspect was when our supply chain kind of era, we believe that you never want to constrain demand, that we always want to understand all demand at all times from a forecasting standpoint so that we have better, clear direction for what our opportunity loss was out front. What we didn't realize is that by unconstraining that demand, we did not have clear visibility on our ability to utilize our resource capacities and constraints within our plants. Therefore, we weren't always being as upfront with our customer as far as telling them what we could do, when we could do it, and how we could deliver it. So we actually worked with the DELMIA Quintiq project team, and they did a great job of coming back to us and providing a two-tier view, which basically provides our demand in an unconstrained format as well as a constrained format. In the constrained level, we'll be able to immediately tell our customers what we can and cannot deliver out front through our capacities and constraints of different lines and packaging. Our tiered deployment spreads, that's something that we made a decision on. We felt like that by phasing in our implementations and deployments through a longer course of time, that we'd have better success and learn, be able to fix our errors a little bit more quickly there. But the reality is, it comes with some negatives whenever you spread out your deployment versus a big bang deployment. You have a longer learning curve from the time you start training people. People don't always retain everything that they've been taught. The training and retention is spread out because you spend your training into one area, and then when you go through your next implementation, you're going to train again and then again and again as you continue to bring out different modules. And of course, all that between the learning curve, the training retention comes at as a financial resource and a labor resource draw on on a company. So, and finally, I'd tell you your culture adoption. Your culture adoption is a process in which, for us, it's been a struggle, but not from I felt like we mitigated a lot of the struggle that we anticipated, but I don't think you could ever eliminate some of the culture adoption anytime you bring out a new software program. For us, the reality is by doing a little bit more of a tiered deployment, I think it probably helped us in some of our culture adoption because we allowed people to kind of ease their way in. So I'll talk a little bit about what the wins were. I've mentioned some of those opportunities, and I've even kind of gone over some of these, but one of the biggest wins for us was what we, with the DELMIA Quintiq solution now, can tell a customer at any time, on any given day, at any hour of the day, what we have available, where that meat is available, when it is available, as far as what day of the week, and what capacity do we have to make it, meaning can it be a one-piece package, a two-piece package? Can it be a multi-piece package? Can it be, all these different levels of constraints, which of course are loaded into the back data side of our Quintiq system. So let's talk a little bit about the road ahead. As we've gone through what Quintiq has provided to Smithfield, it's been a great solution. We feel like it's been a good experience, and we look forward to some of the introductions of more modules as we head towards an enterprise-wide solution. Companies such as ourselves and as well as others will be faced with AI technology within their operations here in the coming years. It's already here. Some are already using it, but it's pretty small in their minority share at this time. The AI technology that will happen today, as I mentioned, with some of the labor and the automation processes that are coming in with different companies, you're going to continue to see this equipment installed into industries and companies that are going to allow data to get data from all the lines to be able to then be mined and refined for efficiencies, and companies will be utilizing those skill sets really to understand how can these lines perform better in their plants and operations, that they'll be able to provide the best product at the least cost opportunity. We think about e-commerce solutions. I don't think it's any surprise that we're seeing e-commerce really disrupt a lot of these, what I'll call the standard grocery retail market chain. We're not going to see grocery stores completely fold up and go away anytime in the near future, but e-commerce is certainly going to be a disruption, and we've already seen that, whether that comes through through the realities of pick and ship, where people just show up at the store, or whether that's home delivery. But we're seeing the likes of certainly the Amazon purchase of Whole Foods and others that is creating disruptions in the retail arena that will really change the dynamics of how consumers buy food. Today, most individuals under the age of 30 spend very few trips to the grocery store to buy all of their grocery needs. Most people under 30 years of age today will actually just worry about the next 48 to 72 hours and is more than willing to have someone deliver that to their door already. Even though they get to go online and pick what that is, it's nice that it just delivers to the door at their eyes a very reasonable price. Lastly, I'll just talk about alternative proteins. We're seeing today supply chain disruptions as we talk about the AI and the e-commerce. So you can not ignore in our world of commodity protein disassembly, the alternative protein is really something that either, whether you want to refer to it as cell-based plant technology or whatever the case may be, you're going to see alternative proteins continue to be a disruption, because these are areas in which, if you think about the traditional corn and soybean that is fed to animals, and animals then are raised to then be harvested for products. Well, now if you eliminate all that front half of you've got a complete disruption in your supply chain on the front end, and quite frankly, you may end up with some supply chain differentials on the back. And so a lot of companies today are really trying to understand, how do I introduce new segments into my supply chain without disrupting my existing? For us, as we start to evaluate future enterprise solutions with DELMIA Quintiq, I can tell you that these are the things that we think about and how their solutions can bring us opportunities ahead. With that, I'll go ahead and turn the time over for any questions.
Thank you, Brian. Now we'd like to look at the questions that were asked during the webinar. The first question is, how did you prioritize your implementation phases? Well,
for us, we felt like there was a fundamental dependency as far as some of the items in which we were getting solutions from the DELMIA Quintiq. So for us, we prioritize our sales forecasting, being more at the front end of our order-to-cash cycle. We felt like that the sales forecast would need to come out first. Then what we refer to as PA, or product availability, was our second implementation deployment, and that was really about being able to show our sales representatives in the field what was available at any given time, where it was available, and how it can be delivered. And then finally was our supply planning, or our schedule side, where our supply planning teams schedule all of our plants to be able to fulfill all the requested demand.
Thank you. The next question is, what new processes or functions did you put into place to support the new tool?
Well, as I think about processes that were really brought in, I would just tell you some of the results have been more of our KPI visibility, and some measurements certainly have gotten better, but some of the processes utilized to get there probably incorporated, if nothing else, we did a kind of a culture adoption process, which was pretty significant. It actually took 25 of our executive leadership team, and those 25 members actually got together and agreed upon that in the next 48 hours we're going to spend these 2 days learning everything the system's going to do for us, everything the system's not going to do for us, and when we walk out the door, we're going to all agree that this is our future and what it will be. And by far and away, one of the best things we actually did to give the adoption, to get people on board, and quite frankly, become basically a team player right out of the gate, because they quote unquote did not know something. With that kind of statement was kind of erased from the quiver, if you will, that people could use. Last thing I'd tell you that we probably adopted was a better process review. So as we think about some of the processes that have come about, I mentioned at the very beginning, one of the reasons we chose Quintiq was the core foundation was that's Quintiq, that's what it is, and that Smithfield, kind of all their business needs are really built on top. Well, in the past, we really had kind of processes that were probably built around our system. This was the first time then when we said, okay, now that we're going to build this kind of ground up, how many processes still make sense? And so it gave us an opportunity to evaluate all of our transactional processes, as well as just even some of our just internal processes of, just standard activity processes. We started thinking of in terms of, okay, what's the end result needed, and what do I need to really do to get there? What am I doing to get there, and is that still the right thing to do? As we started to evaluate those things and really define what we thought was the right process going forward, it then gave us the opportunity to really build a system around our process, not a process around our system.
Thank you. And a question for Charlie. One of the capabilities mentioned was what-if scenario management. Could you talk a little more about this?
Sure, Caitlin. I'd love to. So I know both Brian and myself mentioned this capability. So I guess I'd ask, have you ever gotten so far down a spreadsheet hole only to find out that you had to, you made a mistake and you have to backpedal? So many a time I've been unable to backpedal far enough. And I've also been in supply chains where the only way to model or consider a change is to do it live in the production system and make those entries, in the live production environment. So bad practice aside, how hard is that to reverse if you need to? With DELMIA Quintiq, I as a planner can make copies of my production environment, and I'm immediately put in a sandbox environment where I can make adjustments and explore without disturbing that live production system. And after making whatever update I'd like to in the sandbox scenario, I can then compare and contrast the key figures and KPIs of both that sandbox and production scenario in order to make an informed decision about what I really want my plan to look like.
Great, thank you. And thank you to Charlie and Brian. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. If you asked a question that was not answered, we will follow up with you after today's webinar. I'd like to invite all of you to hear more about DELMIA Quintiq and hear from more of our customers at DELMIA Quintiq World Tour in Philadelphia this fall. You can find the registration link in the slides shared in the Handouts tab of your GoToWebinar window. Thank you, everyone.